Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. Father Hines and his great band.
Morning, everybody.
From the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's Great South Side. Get ready now for 30 minutes of Super Jive in the Father Hines style.
30 minutes of Super Jive in the Father Hines style. Well, 10 or 15 here. Hey, Chris. Morning, Martin.
It's the Limehouse Blues.
Hey, Dina. Hey, Karen, Jill, and Kelly. Morning all around. Hey, Lisa. Hey, Timothy, Ellen, and other Lisa. Hey, Eric. Morning, Patty. Hey, Gladys. Morning, Amy. Yes, Miles, come on over. Yeah. Wanna hop up? Let's say hi to all the nice people, Miles. Yeah. Hey, Gail and Marshawn and Larissa. Hey, Gina, Aviva, Bridget, Marina, Jeanette, Becky, Amy, Carrie. Hey, Layla. Oh, yeah. Miles hears me start talking and say, oh, is it time for me to come on? Hey, Tim and Georgette over on YouTube. Hey, Alexandra. Hey, Beth. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Carol. Hey, Heidi. James. Oi, oi, oi. Hey, Heidi. Hey, Linda. Hey, James, on Tuesday I'm going to show pictures from our Savannah trip on the morning mini tour, I think. Hey, Amy. Hey, Georgia. Hey, Christine. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Bridget's mom. Hey, Jamie. Hey, Timothy. Hi, Kathleen. Welcome along, Cheryl and Patty. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Kathleen, Tashera, Marilyn, and Katie. Hey, all around. Gonna shut down the old mail.
That's what you call a powerhouse coder.
Hey, Katie. Hey, Laura. Yep, perfect day for it. Oh, Miles is trying to climb right on up me now, so I guess you better come hang out here. Yeah, his eyes are more yellow than green. Here we go, Miles. Here, seems say hi to the nice people. Yeah. Miles says, hey, back to Patches. Whoop. Okay. Morning, Jay. Hey, Londa. Hey, Shelly. Hey, Jeff. Morning, Darcy. Hey, Geraldine. Hey, Sherry over on YouTube. Hey, Paula and Amber. Good morning, Mom. And yes, before we start, I'll show the trapeze video from last night. Gina, no, I didn't get to that statue, but yeah, she's on my Graceland tours quite a bit. Sylvia Shaw Judson. Also, her Spirit of Electricity fresco shows up a lot on these tours. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Cindy and Marshawn. Oh, we're glad to have you in Chicago, Marshawn. Hey, Patty, Lorena, and Laura. Hey, Elaine and Cindy. It is a nice day for a cruise. It's actually a nice day for an in-person cruise. It's only like 70 out today. It's nice. Last night on the beach was so nice. Thank you, Gina. Hey, Karen. Just realized I haven't done the boat tour in several months. I hope I get it right. Tim, we're doing in-person tours on Saturdays. Like yesterday we did Graceland Cemetery in person. Next Saturday is going to be Rose Hill. Kristen, that was my problem too. Hey, Ann, hey, Mona. Also, the fear of heights I've developed in just the last few years really got to me up getting onto the platform. Hey, Mona, the county fair.
Clap and carry on and jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
Hey, Rebecca. Morning, Toby. James, don't you get all the same ads for mid-century apparel on Facebook that I do? Sherry, next Saturday's tour is should be 11 o'clock. John, I'm not sure how much smut there'll be. The smut thing on the t-shirt is an article about Minnie Wallace from before she moved to Chicago, when she was on trial for allegedly murdering her husband, who was like 40 years older than she. She was 15, he was 60. A whole parade of witnesses came through to say the guy was a slimeball. Betsy, of course. Hey, Nancy. Well, yeah, people bring stuff for me to sign at Corso. I'm not like Jose Canseco or anything. Of course, if you want smut, Tuesday night is going to be the effing Chicago edition of the Virtual Ghost Tour, which means more swearing. Hey, Sid. Thanks, Octavio. Hey, if it's August 1st, it's one day closer to October. But it almost feels like fall weather out the last couple of days. It has been so nice. Hey, Christopher. Hey, Christopher, there will be an in-person boat tour October 1st. I'll have the details about it first for the regulars group. Hey, Christy. Hey, Sue. Hey, Mona. Miles getting over it on the chair next to me here, wanting all the attention as usual. Oh yeah, over on effing, I don't know why so many people thought Mandy's Talk was going to be a ghost hunt, but having worked in the ghost hunting field for a long time, I know that ghost hunting people have a real talent for thinking they see things that aren't really there. Hey, Gene. Hey, Kristen. Tim, I can believe the Cubs. Only a couple of great Cubs never got traded. There's just Ernie Banks and Ryan Sandberg. Jerry, welcome to town. The Magnificent Miles. Why haven't we thought of calling him that before? It was right there the whole time. Even last night I was driving down the Mag Mile with Ronnie and she started going, Miles, Miles, Miles. Hey, Eileen.
Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive on the general heading of So Help Me.
Morning, Juanita. Hey, June. Oh, hey, Mike, that's cool. Hey, Mary. Hello, Karen. And Karen's mom. Hey, Sherry Ann. What's your game? Can anybody play? Hey, Irene. Hey, Libby. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Hey, Lenora. Hey, Barb. Betsy will be the wrong cemetery for Pullman next Saturday, so I definitely hope he doesn't show up at Rose Hill. I mean, we saw him yesterday at Graceland. Hey, Emily. Hey, Carol. Hey, back from nice low 70s Chicago today. It's so nice. I went and got some bagels for the new neighbors who were moving in. Went and got some coffee from a good place. Walked around neighborhoods a little different, a little ways from mine, just for a change of scenery. Morning, Linda in Boston. Hey, Amy. Hey, Chandra. Jerry, we're doing live tours on Saturdays. Go to MysteriousChicago.com for info. I'm only announcing them about a week at a time now. We're really kind of taking things slow. Morning, Todd on Twitch. Morning, Rob. Miles. I'm gonna have to put up some of your toys over here in case I have to toss them at you, huh? Alright, we'll wait till this Earl Father Hines song ends and we'll get started properly. So many people show up right at 10 o'clock. It takes a couple extra minutes. Oh, thanks, Rob. How you doing, Count Lukey, over on YouTube? Hey, Stephanie.
Well, we're about halfway.
All right. That wraps up some of the Earl Father Hines, which means it is time to go ahead and get started. Welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours here in Chicago. I've been a tour guide and historian around here for about 15 years. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, and Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, and Ghosts of Chicago, now a rare collector's item in print form. I'm famous enough that Candace, who came on my tour yesterday, even painted me into a mural standing here between Louis Sullivan and Daniel Burnham. Burnham and I are probably talking about how we're making sure that Louis is just drinking a Diet Coke here. I've also started doing boat tours 5 or 6 years ago, so this is going to be a virtual edition of that. But first, as promised, so last night, I remembered that there was an event going on, an event called Trapeze in Monochrome, featuring effing Chicago's own Layla Royale. Here is Layla doing trapeze properly. That's her in the yellow. All right. Then after that, they said that anybody who had $10 could do a try on the trapeze, and I just couldn't turn it down, even though I'm a little bit scared of heights. I've only gotten to me in the last couple of years, but climbing up the ladder and getting on the platform, I don't know when I've last been so scared other than times when I've read the news in the last few years. But okay, here's the video of me going on the trapeze. They're saying reach out and grab the other side. I'm saying I can't. I don't think I can do it. Here we go. They're trying to tell me to raise my legs up onto the bar, but that was not happening. My shoulders are separated from the rest of the body at this point. flies through the air with the least of ease. The daring middle-aged man on the fleeting tripods. Fleeting tripos. I will show you the flip-off, though. You can see me shaking there.
Pretty much. How was it? Painful. Yeah. Oh yeah, they're all.
That was really painful. But I'm glad I did it. It's always nice to face your fears every now and then. So if you're afraid of getting on a boat, this is a good way to acclimate yourself to this sort of thing. So all right, let us start with our virtual architectural boat tour. Welcome along, everybody. So here we are next to Navy Pier in DuSable Harbor. DuSable Harbor, named after Chicago's first known permanent settler, Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, about whom very little is known. He is thought to have been a fur trader from Haiti, but there's also theories that he might have been a guy who escaped from slavery down south, or even a pirate on the run from down in the Caribbean. Frankly, we just don't know. But he moved to Chicago in the late 1770s, lived here for a while. 50 years later, 50 or 60 years later, 1834, we officially became a town. 1836, we officially became a city. There's a great outstanding legend that we needed 150 people to vote to incorporate, and only 140 people showed up, so 10 of them got back in line and voted again. But like most of those people about election fraud in Chicago, it takes like 5 minutes of research to find out it's not actually true. It's just one of those things that kind of should be true. And we have quite a lot of stories in Chicago history that are of the not really true, but should be true variety. But even some of the wilder ones, if you go digging into them, it turns out to be at least closer to true than you would have thought, like some of the stories about where the land itself comes from here. Now, Lake Michigan used to go all the way out to where the next bridge is that you can see off in the distance there, or beyond that. All the stuff that you see on the left is pretty much rubble from after the Great Chicago Fires. As you guys probably know, about 150 years ago, we had a pretty big fire around here. And when that was done, they just swept all the rubble, dust, and ash into the water and created their own new land. A little bit different is the land that we're facing here on the right, to the north. What happened here was in 1888, this was all still water, but then a guy named Captain George Wellington Streeter crashed his houseboat onto the shore and started charging people money to dump their garbage around his ship. And the city was already filling it in anyway, so they just kind of let it happen, not realizing quite what a weirdo they were dealing with here. Captain Streeter decided that not only did he own this new land that had been created, but that it was his own independent country of which he was the emperor. It then took the cops 30 years to get rid of the guy. He had a whole army of hobos that he'd allowed to emigrate to his new country. So it wasn't just legal battles, there were gunfights and everything. But finally, after 30 years, he lost the Battle of Garbage Hill. Spent the last couple of years of his life selling coffee at what was then known as Municipal Pier, now Navy Pier. But over on the other side of these two buildings here, the River Point buildings, we now have a life-size statue of Captain George Wellington Streeter. So that's how we treat our criminals and pirates here in Chicago. We make statues of them. Now, just to put a few things in perspective. At the time Captain Streeter crashed ashore, we had about 1 million people living in the city. 50 years before, when we incorporated, there were about 3,000 people living in the city. No city had ever grown quite as quickly as this. So, with all of that growth, it's kind of natural that this became the birthplace of the skyscraper, unless you look at the soil around here. It's a very wet, marshy soil. Older buildings, the walls were load-bearing walls. If you look at some of the older ones, you see walls that are like 6 feet thick because they're holding up the whole building. So if those got above 8 or 9 floors, they would start to sink into the wet, marshy soil. But we solved that in the 1880s. There was a guy named William LeBaron Jenney who came up with what we call steel frame construction. The idea is you just build a skeleton frame for the building, and then everything else, all of the glass, all of the stone, all of the masonry, all of that just gets draped over that skeleton like a curtain, which allowed for much lighter buildings and allowed him to build the first modern skyscraper anywhere right here in Chicago, the Home Insurance Building. 10 stories high as any building ought to go. Now, I won't be showing you that today, because for one thing, it's not on the river, and for another, they tore it down in the 1930s. Well, depending on who you believe, they tore it down in the 1930s. Long about 1902, the Chicago Tribune announced that the Home Insurance Building had been destroyed by dinosaurs. It was April Fool's Day. They were having entirely too much fun with April Fool's Day at the Tribune that year. But we became not only the birthplace of the skyscraper, but by some metrics, the skyscraper capital of the world. We've got every kind of architecture you can imagine represented almost entirely just right on the Chicago River itself. We've got Beaux-Arts, we've got Art Deco, we've got the Chicago School, we've got modernism, we've got postmodernism, all mixed together here. It's almost like walking around a museum if you think about it. And we're going to go under here. Once we get underneath the bridge, we'll be able to see a pretty good Architecture 101, just to kind of know what you're looking at ahead of time. So when skyscrapers first started to be built in the late 19th and early 20th century, a lot of them were the style that we know as Beaux-Arts style. Like off in the distance, you can see this one with the columns on it. That was the style then. Lots of statues, lots of Greek and Roman influences. Then in the 1920s, that was overtaken by Art Deco, coming up right underneath me right here. And I'll show a shot of how that would look coming from another angle. 333 North Michigan from the 1920s in the Art Deco style. More of a streamlined verticality, simple geometric art, the architecture of the Jazz Age. Then that was replaced in the mid-20th century by modernism, the plain black rectangles that you can see around on the left, or right over here on the right, the Fidelity Insurance Building, the Equity Building. This is technically International School, which is like modernism without some of the elegance. Then after that came postmodernism, which is a whole other thing. Really, if you see a building and can't tell quite how to describe it, you can just say, oh, how postmodern. You'll almost always be right. But that one on the right, one of very few designed by a woman, Nathalie Delbois. But coming up right in front of us now, taking up most of the screen, one of my very favorites, one of the anchors of the Magnificent Mile, the Wrigley Building. 1920 by Graham Anderson Prosed and White in roughly the Beaux-Arts style, but designed to look like a cathedral in Seville, Spain. Now, this was named for William Wrigley Jr., the Wrigley Spearmint Gum guy, same guy whose name is on Wrigley Field. And one of the things that made him such a success was not just that his gum was so good, it's that his advertising was so good. He was one of the first guys to have giant billboards all over Times Square. So when he built a building on here that on what would become the Magnificent Mile, everybody assumed there'd be giant Wrigley Spearmint Gum billboards all over it. And they joked about it being the monument to spearmint. So he delighted us by saying no, he didn't want to do that, just a small brass plaque that says Wrigley Building on the bottom, no advertisement. And we loved him for it. He didn't put his name in giant letters on the building like some hoodlum. And we loved him for it. Other architects kept on building in that same style, just so they would match the Wrigley Building. Which is the kind of thing that architects do have to think about, is how is my building going to fit in with all of these other buildings nearby? Like, take 401, the board of directors of this building on the left likes me to call it 401 Whacker. When the architect Adrian Smith was designing this, he had to figure, how do I make this fit in with all of the other buildings nearby, even though it's going to be 3 times the size of them? He did this with little tricks called contextualism. It's the way that you kind of collude with the built environment. So the first setback on the right there is set at the same height as the setback on the Wrigley Building. Setback on the left is the same height as a couple of buildings down from that. Setback on the other side is set at the set height of another building. This helps to blend it in and makes it look as though it belongs there, which is no easy trick, but Adrian Smith is a really clever architect. Now, just beyond that, one of the buildings that mixes in with it, the black one coming up here, is modernism, originally known as the IBM building, now the AMA building, by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who is often considered like the father of modernism. Other people were still putting statues on buildings. He would stand in front of his students and hold up a brick. Say, behold the brick. The brick is truly something. As a modernist, he just liked to emphasize the simple beauty of the natural materials. He would have said that in a much thicker German accent than I can possibly fake without looking like a total jerk. Now, one of his students was a guy named Bertrand Goldberg, who designed these 2 buildings coming up over here, Marina City, in the 1960s. Now, Goldberg believed in a lot of the tenets of modernism, but he didn't like all of the rectangles. Obviously. He is often quoted as saying that there are no right angles in nature, so there shouldn't be any in architecture either. though he does have plenty of buildings with right angles in them. But his idea with these wasn't just to make a cool building. He wasn't just an architect at heart. At heart, he was almost like a utopian idealist. His idea with these was to draw people back to the city. These were designed in the 50s and 60s, an era when so many people were moving out to the suburbs. He thought he would give you all the conveniences of the suburbs, like a parking space in one building. So inside of here, there were not just apartments, there was a grocery store, there were offices, there was a bowling alley. For those were bowling days, and most men bowled hard. If you lived here, you would never have to leave. Which, ideal place for an introvert. They were thought of as the most modern buildings in the world at the time. They still look very modern to me now. They frankly don't look that dated. They've aged pretty well. But they're not quite as modern in their functionality. They're cement buildings. Cement buildings are where cell phone signal goes to die. But cement was all the rage in the 1960s. That was when you had this movement called brutalism. Big hulking slabs of cement. Think of like parking garages from the 50s, shopping malls from the 70s, or here 55 Whacker, known as the hashtag building or the pound sign building, depending on how old you are. This is a very restrained example of brutalism, and it's brutalism that at least has some clean lines, designed by a guy named Otto Stark, which is probably the best name ever for a brutalist architect. He also happens to be my next door neighbor right now. He doesn't come out much. He only comes out at night at 2 o'clock in the morning. Seeing him is almost like a Bigfoot sighting or something. But brutalism is becoming popular again. For years it's been the butt of every architecture joke, but now people are starting to unironically claim to love it again. Everything goes in cycles. Now, one thing we don't see a whole lot of on the river is older buildings. This is the Reed Murdoch building from 1913. It's one of the older ones we're going to be seeing today. This one, the clock tower in it is a little bit off-center. You can't really tell on the video feed, even just looking at it across the river. You have to really kind of look. But they used to be right in the middle, but they had to lop off part of the building over on the left when they added the new bridge. This is what they call the Prairie School of Architecture, a lot of horizontal lines. And also a lot of little images of wheat shafts on there that sort of represent the fact that the outside of what was going on inside. Something Prairie School architects like to do is have the outside represent what goes on the inside. And at the time, that was a grocery warehouse. Now, the LaSalle Street Bridge that we just went under wasn't always there. It used to be a tunnel underneath there instead. On the right, the building that says Chicago School on it is the best example we see of what was called the Chicago School of Architecture that emerged in the early 20th century. More clean lines than Beaux-Arts style, the 19th century stuff, but not quite as clean as Art Deco. They're usually divided into threes, a base, a shaft, and a capital, not unlike an old Greek column. This one was designed by a guy named Lars Hallberg, whose most of his famous buildings around Chicago are houses in the Gold Coast. As we get under here, we get back to some Art Deco with the Merchandise Mart, Graham Anderson Probst and White 1930. It doesn't really look as flashy as you would normally think of for Art Deco, but this was supposed to be like a wholesale merchandise showroom. It's the kind of thing that would normally be like corrugated metal and aluminum siding. Now, these things out front that look like giant Pez dispensers are busts of the giants of merchandising, like Marshall Field himself is up there, Montgomery Ward is there. I always wish you could put a quarter in a slot and make them talk. Like at Marshall Field up there going, "I'm Marshall Field. I was a total jerk who got all my good ideas from Harry Selfridge and gave him no credit whatsoever. Ha, 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 ha." I don't know when I decided that Marshall Field laughed like the Count, but that's my story and I am sticking to it. Now, the Field Company didn't even own the place for very long. They built it right before the Depression, ended up selling it to Joseph Kennedy of the Kennedy family, who also own a whole chunk of the land over here where they've just built Wolf Point East. Wolf Point West is this other bluish one here, and they're working on Wolf Point South, which at one point at least was planned to be 1,000 feet tall. And I love that they called these the Wolf Point buildings. Wolf Point is what the early pioneers and settlers called this little patch of land here where the two branches of the river come together. Exactly why they called it Wolf Point is kind of lost to history. There's a couple of theories, but most likely it's just the fact that there were so many wolves in the environment back then. And in fact, in the 1840s, they used to have holidays once a year. They would shut down all the businesses so everybody could help chase wolves out of the woods and into the ice on the lake. It was a holiday not unlike Whacking Day or Weasel Stomping Day, which is still celebrated in a couple of small towns, at least according to cartoons. But this was downtown Chicago to the early pioneers and settlers. At the time, the biggest thing around was the place called the Saguenash Hotel, which was not really a hotel so much as it was a tavern. You could pay to sleep there, but you didn't get a bed. You slept on the floor and you liked it. For an extra buck, you could rent a blanket, but if you fell asleep under the blanket, they would give it to somebody else. And probably not just to be jerks, clean laundry was one of those things they probably couldn't get much of at the time. Little things like that we don't always think of anymore, like, it's only been in recent generations we could turn water into ice anytime we felt like it. They used to have to get pretty creative with cold storage. In front of us is the old North American Cold Storage Building, in fact, from 1906. And to keep things cool in there at the time, the walls were about 6 feet thick. And you can see that in some of the cutouts here. And the walls were stuffed with frozen horsehair, frozen cork, and some kind of pipes full of a brine with ammonia brine that was used as a coolant. So, in the 1970s, the architect Harry Weese decided that he wanted to turn this into condos and lofts. Now, to do this, he had to haul away like 500 train car loads of frozen horsehair. He had to add all of the windows. If you look closely, you can see these little dots all over the place, and those aren't decorations, those are bracings keeping the building together. It would have been a lot easier just to tear the building down and put up a new one, but for one thing, the greenest building is one that already exists, and Harry Weese was a very preservation-minded architect. They used to have a joke around town, never stand next to Harry Weese for 5 entire minutes, otherwise he'll have you declare a public landmark. Then you'll have to go and get yourself a public hearing every time you want to change your haircut. All right, we're coming up to a point here where we're actually on the ship. This is a really low bridge. We have to duck under it. But even if we didn't, I would want us to bow our heads as we pass under here. This is the bridge that about 15 years ago, another boat tour just like this one was going under right as the Dave Matthews Band's tour bus driver decided to park on the bridge and let all of the sewage off of the bus and onto the boat below. I was not there that terrible day, but we remember. We remember. And if I ever get my head knocked off on a bridge, it is definitely going to be at the Dave Matthews Band Poop Bridge. Over on the right here, the East Bank Club kind of represents how the river was still pretty disgusting in the 1970s. This building was built with its back to the river, because nobody was going to want to come to the health club and just look out on the river in those days. But it was starting to get cleaned up by then. And in fact, about 25 years later, we had these ones, the Kinsey Townhouses, which are all facing the river. And these ones, people ask all the time what these go for. The townhouses are like $3 million each. And a couple of boat tour companies I've been on, they've made us get off of the microphone at the point when we go by those. I think they're getting some bribes from the people who bought the townhouses, not realizing that every 5 minutes somebody's going to come by and talk about how much your house costs. So now we have spun around in this virtual vessel. Straight ahead of us, this bridge that's standing upright all the time is the Kinsey Street Railroad Bridge. At the time they built it, it was the largest steel drawbridge in the world, and at the time it went up and down about 30 times a day. By the 1990s, only one train was still using it anymore, so it only went up and down once a day. And then that train stopped coming through too, so they just leave it up all the time now. I understand they raise it down every now and then, just to make sure that they still can, but never on a day when I'm there. Now and then people will come up with a new city planning idea that would make some use of it and have it go back up and down again. But it's so well built and it has landmark status, so actually taking it down is a bit of a trick. Ducking down once again under the Dave Matthews Band Poop Bridge, the last place you want to end up haunting. Now, Harry Weese, the really preservation-minded architect, wasn't just a preservation guy, also a very innovative architect in his own right. He designed these 4 cool townhouses here called the River Cottages, which opened in 1990. Now, these were designed to look like the old sailboats and schooners that used to sail up to Wolf Point. 3 out of 4 are still owned by the original owner. One of them was listed and sold for about $2 million just a few years back. And I love that happened because of that it was sold, we got to have a real estate listing that showed us pictures of what they look like on the inside. And the impression I got was that Harry Weese and his staff were apparently watching a lot of Pee-wee's Playhouse in 1990. But weren't we all? Now, coming up on the right, this is the River Bend buildings, mansionettes down below, condos up top. The middle section here is a parking garage. but it's so narrow that you can't really turn a car around in there, so there's an elevator that takes cars to the different levels. We have to be fairly creative with some of these things. We're trying to cram a lot of stuff into a really small space here. Car elevators are something we've been experimenting with since the 1920s. That's one of the challenges, is try to get these things all together, find a place to put all of the people and all of their stuff, and still have it look good. Like, take these things underneath the River Bend building, the River Point building here, which look like portholes. That ties it in visually to the river cottages and some other buildings up close. If you look really closely inside of them, they're portholes that are pumping out diesel exhaust fumes from the railroad tracks that are hidden underneath the buildings. A lot of these buildings are built on what's called air rights. Back in the 20s, the railroads figured out that they could sell the land over the tracks for people to build on and make themselves some more money. They just had to build the buildings in such a way that they would still able to have all the structural integrity, which was no easy task, but they pulled it off over and over again. And speaking of difficult feats of engineering, coming up right in front of us is 150 North Riverside, one of our newest architectural gems by Getch Partners. Now, this plot of land where this was built sat empty for years. For a very long time, there's only so much space. You have to be X number of feet back from the water. Then just beyond that, if they got a few feet on, they got into railroad tracks and streets. So they had to figure out what could they build that was cost effective in this very small space. The space represented just by that stone portion. Finally, Getch Partners figured out that they could build what was called a core supported structure. The idea is the center building holds up all of the weight. It would rise up until it was out of everything's way, then taper outward, creating their own space up in the sky. Now, you might have heard that tall buildings like this are known to kind of sway in the wind. Officially, they don't sway, what they do is give, but if you're not a physicist, then it means about the same thing. So, to lessen the effect of motion sickness, up on the top of this, they've got a thing called a liquid-tuned mass damper. What that is this giant tank of water that's designed so that when the wind blows one way, the water will flow the other to keep everything steady. It's a tremendous feat of engineering, but it's such simple physics if you think about it. It's like something that the ancient Greeks might have done, if they had been able to build 700-foot tall skyscrapers, which they could not, so yeah. Get ourselves under the Randolph Street Bridge here. And see some postmodernism from 1990 over on the right with the Boeing building. Now, this is another air rights building. You can see there's two sides to it. There's a taller portion and a shorter portion. Now, this one, the trains go underneath it. They've cleverly hidden the grates behind these bushes, but now and then we can see the lights going by. The trick with it is this shorter portion of it is built over the part where the tracks cross over each other. So that meant there weren't quite as many support beams and columns to hold up the building as they would normally be using. So instead there are some steel trusses on the top of this that attach it to the next one over. So it's effectively the smaller portion is being dangled off of the larger portion, which sure turned a lot of heads when it was built. The Washington Boulevard Bridge is not actually named after George Washington. It is named after Frederick Boom Boom Washington of the Sweat Hogs. Hi there. All right, so now from some Holabird and Root Art Deco from the 20s, the Chicago Daily News building, kind of a cubist version of a Sphinx right here. Now, this is one of the first skyscrapers to have a big public park section out front of it, which is kind of an odd idea to do at the time. It was a much rougher area back then. Terrific novel from the 40s called Knock on Any Door. It's the origin of the phrase, live fast, die young, and have a good-looking corpse. Just about every other page of this book, it seems like, somebody is getting mugged in the plaza outside of the Daily News building. Daily News was finally digitized a couple of years ago. You can get it on Genealogy Bank. They still don't have, like, the Chicago Times-Herald, most of the Chicago Times. They got the later Chicago Times. They don't have the Chicago Gem of the Prairie, the Post, the Press, the Dispatch. Nobody's got the Dispatch. Or several others beyond that. Now we get into some modernism here by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. A group that was so devoted to the ideas of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe that Frank Lloyd Wright used to call them the Three Blind Mice. But in a really good Ludwig Mies van der Rohe style building, these plain black rectangles, they're built very elegantly. You can't ever see the seams, you can never see the screws. And, they're still just about as modern looking now as they would have been 60 years ago when they were built, which is really saying something. A lot of 60-year-old buildings don't age quite this well. And of course, Van der Rohe, you got to remember, came out of Germany between the wars, when materials were really limited, so the idea was to make as much building as you could out of as little materials as you could. But then by the 1970s, people were getting tired of plain black rectangles, so they decided to start mixing it up a little bit with buildings like Gateway 3, this next one coming beyond those, where they tried a different color. White. It was slow going to get into postmodernism for some of these groups, but eventually they started thinking, why don't we bring back some of the cool old styles now that we got better materials? Why don't we bend them around a little bit, try some different colors? Let's get weird, in fact. In front of it, one of the old bridge houses. Bridge tenders actually used to have to hang out in these things. Some of them, they have 4 of them. Only one was ever occupied, but 4 of them was just good symmetry. We talked a minute ago about sometimes they like the outside to reflect the inside of a building, and sometimes that just kind of happens organically. Like this smaller one with the X's here. When this first opened in the 70s, the Chicago Tribune described it as like a small black box heavily strapped with steel cables, as though we were holding in something volatile, something that had to be contained or else it would explode. Which is a pretty good description of what was going on in the building at the time. This was the old commodities exchange where guys would yell and scream at each other over oat, corn, and barley deals. Coming up on the left is one that I used to describe as a good example of bad modernism. This is one where you can see the seams and you can see the screws. And initially, they just had this plain cement slab over the elevator shaft. The Chicago Reader called them conspicuously dull. So finally they just got tired of being conspicuously dull and decided to add this design element over the elevator shaft. So what they added here was this map of the Chicago River. The red dot there is the "You Are Here" portion. So right now we can plot out most of the route of this tour just by looking at the building. We're currently heading downstairs. And that made the building more of a landmark and more desirable of a location overnight. It's very unusual that you can do just such a little bit of design and have it go such a long way, but it happens. Now, I love that they did it, because now I get to talk about something cool about that building instead of just how bad that building is. And yeah, you get up close to it, the seams don't line up, the lines aren't consistent, you can see all of the screws, see all of the scars and the stitches, but the map makes such a difference. And on the right is a building that I was just about thinking was cursed for a while there. This is the old Chicago Post Office. Now, when it was built by Graham Anderson, Probst, and White in the 30s, it was about as modern as post offices get. There's a air rights building, so it's a train down underneath it. And for a while, they were even experimenting with autogyros landing on the roof to take mail back and forth to the airport. It was as modern as you could possibly get. But by the 1960s, it had already kind of outlived its usefulness. The technology just wasn't always built to last. So they ended up building another post office that's a little more modern, a little further down. This one just sat empty for the better part of 20 years. And for years, it would be like there were fires there, they would sell it to a developer who turned out to be a con artist, or there would be tax problems with it, or asbestos issues. Plan after plan for what to do with it came and went, and everything always seemed to fall apart. The center could never quite hold. But finally, in the last couple of years, they started working on turning it into offices, which is kind of a surprise because most of what they've been building downtown has been residential. Or really mixed use has been the real big word. Like these ones you can see coming up here, it's a mix of residential, retail, and office space. That's been kind of the way of things to go. I mean, it's almost like we've hit like a 1970s science fiction book. Like any 70s or 80s sci-fi book that takes place in the future always has people living at the mall. And that's what we're building towards at a lot of these things. In fact, a little bit beyond this is the Roosevelt Collection, which is a movie theater, mall, shops, and apartments. There's a similar development up on North Halsted. But really, if you think about it, it's all kind of a throwback to the idea of Bertrand Goldberg and his idea of a city within a city back at Marina Towers. And if you remember those, you might recognize his architectural style coming up here on the left at the River City building. The River City. Next stop, River City. They do in fact have trouble with the capital T that rhymes with C, and that stands for cell phone coverage. But this also was designed as a city within a city by Goldberg. This was his follow-up. Initially, he wanted it to be 75 stories high and to continue curving all the way back up to the last bridge. This would have been a building that would hold 250,000 people, like the whole population of Des Moines, in one building. But it took him up to the 1980s to finally get it built, which makes it a fairly late example of brutalism. But it's still kind of a city within a city there. This is where, inside of here, they've got a grocery store. There's a preschool. The grocery store next to the preschool is about 50% liquor. There's a doctor's office in there, marina for everybody's boats. This is actually where we're going to be starting the tour on October 1st when we start in person. There's a parking lot, too, which makes it handy. Now, one thing I get asked a lot on these tours is, which of these buildings was Al Capone in? There's a lot of urban legends. None of it's really true. For years I was saying, no, he wasn't in any of these buildings that we can figure out. But I did find one. If you look down the road as we're passing here, for just a split second, you will see a clock tower in the distance. And there it is. There it is, a little clock tower there of Dearborn Station. Al Capone changed trains at Dearborn Station on the way to prison. That's one thing I can actually connect him to here. There's all other urban legends, but they're just that, urban legends. And looming in front of us now, in Springsteen's words, them smokestacks reaching like the arms of God into the beautiful sky of soot and clay. This is a power plant by Graham Anderson, Probst and White. And I think it's terrific. In 1930, they were building even power plants along Art Deco design elements. There's a streamlined verticality and simple geometric art. Let's turn this boat around. That's the Roosevelt collection I was talking about a minute ago right there. This tour kind of runs along, so we'll zip a little bit up here past River City. Right in front of us, you can see this one that we sometimes call the Minecraft building, or the Morse code building. It's the dots and dashes of the balcony here at 225 Van Buren by Ralph Johnson actually can be translated into Morse code with all the dots and the dashes. It stands for MTRDEE. MTRDEE, which means nothing. I can think of several acronyms, like Mr. Trump really does embarrass everyone, but it's really just a coincidence of what the balcony tends to spell out. Good example of a postmodern style building. But to the right, rising up at the pyramid top, one of my very favorites, that unfortunately you get a better view of this in person than you do in virtual, but that is the Board of Trade building from 1930 by Halliburton Root, one of our finest examples of Art Deco. The statue on top is Ceres, the Roman goddess of grains and agriculture. There's a lot of urban legends about the fact that Ceres does not have a face. Simplest answer is really that it's just an Art Deco thing, clean lines. But John Story said something to the effect of, well, it's going to be so high up that nobody's really going to be able to see it anyway. Which other people have kind of distorted and said, so he thought no one would ever build another building this tall again. No, he wasn't a fool. But it was for years, this was the tallest building in the city, this one that you can see emerging the rest of right over here. Because right after it was built, the Depression hit, then World War II came along. Another one with some urban legends about it, right in front of us now, the one with the circular thing on top is called 311 South Wacker. There's a lot of legends about it being like designed on somebody's wedding ring or something, or being the world's largest White Castle. Really what it is a Cone-Peterson Fox building from the early 1990s, a classic piece of postmodernism. One thing postmodernists really liked to do was do updates like new for the 90s editions of classic designs. Like this one is supposed to be a 90s update on the look of the Chicago Tribune Tower. Now, when it was built, 311 South Wacker had the distinction of being the tallest building in the world that didn't have a name. It held on to that record for quite a few years until a couple of years back, 432 Park Avenue in New York was built, which shattered the record significantly. That one kind of gets my goat. I want that record back. But of course, right behind 311 South Wacker and rising above all of the other buildings, as sure as Kilimanjaro rises like Olympus above the Serengeti, the granddaddy of them all here in Chicago, the Sears Tower. 1,451 feet tall. Now, at the time the Sears Tower was built, it was the tallest in the world. Of course, it is now officially known as the Willis Tower, but locals still refer to it as the Sears under penalty of torture. And it looks like Willis has lost their rights to the name, so it might be becoming the United building fairly soon. United has been the biggest tenant there for years. Sears hasn't had a presence there in a long time. But at the time this place was built, and it's actually quite a bit taller. From perspective right here, it looks like it's about the same size as 311. Really, it's about a third taller. 311's not quite 1,000 feet tall. The Sears Tower is just 1,451 and a half feet. Sometimes you see different numbers for it based on where on the building they start measuring. It's on kind of a slope. So if you measure from one corner, it'll be a little bit taller. Who's been here will get a better view. Now, as of the 1970s, they were just starting to build 1,000-foot-tall buildings again. Even after the Depression and World War II ended, throughout the 1950s, the idea was these buildings they were building back in the 30s that were 1,000 feet tall just weren't cost-effective. But Fazlur Khan, the Einstein of engineering, came along and developed what is called bundled tube construction. What you're seeing with the Sears is like 9 of those plain black rectangles that Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill loved so much, but all bundled together. He described it as being like cigarettes coming out of a package at different heights. When I do this tour for school groups, they like me to change that to straws coming out of the package at different heights, but that is not historically accurate. But by bundling them together like this, that made them stronger. One individual tower like that going up that high wouldn't quite stand up to the wind. And when you get up over 1,000 feet, wind is just everything. But by bundling them all together like that, we'll get a better view in a second, they make each other stronger. Like America, they are stronger together. Right in front of us here is another Harry Weiss with the cutout up over on the top. Harry Weiss probably has more buildings on the river than any other architect, possible exception of Adrian Smith. But once we get past this one here, we'll have a bit of a better view of the Sears. Now, that 1,451 feet does not include the antennas up on top. It's a weird little quirk in architecture that spires count towards the overall height, but antennas do not. It's a weird little rule. If we included the antennas, it would be 1,700 feet tall. And when it was built, it was the tallest building in the world, held onto that record for over 20 years, which is a really long time for any building to hold onto that title. And even until just about last year, it was the tallest building with the tallest occupied floor. But that's not the case anymore. Currently, the tallest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is 2,700 feet tall. Like the Sears plus the antennas at another 1,000 feet. Soon to be beaten by the Jeddah Tower in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which will be 3,000 feet tall. And it's no longer even the highest occupied floor in the United States. That is now occupied by Central Park Tower, which just was topped out. However, Central Park Tower, the Jeddah Tower, and the Burj Khalifa were all designed by Chicago architect Adrian Smith, so we still win. USA, USA. And Adam Street here was named after me. There should be an apostrophe there. I keep telling the alderman. He says, Adam, really, don't be such a grammar snob. And I say, well, that makes me a punctuation snob, really. You know, it's the thing we have, me and the alderman. All right, we talked about how buildings sometimes like the outside to reflect the inside. This is the old Hartford Insurance Building. Here, the strength of the exterior stone protects the fragility of the interior glass, the same way the strength of a Hartford insurance policy protects your fragile life. Maybe. I don't know. Couldn't find a whole lot of good data about the Hartford Insurance Building. Now, the old Hartford Insurance Building, Hartford is one of the companies that H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City guy, tried to swindle, but I don't think he got them successfully. Most of the insurance companies figured out what he was up to pretty early on. Dude buys 4 fire insurance policies on the 3rd floor of his building, and strangely enough, it catches fire 2 months later. On our right here, so back to some postmodernism with the Commodities Exchange Building from the 1980s. Now, this place is designed, kind of an interesting design. The 2 towers on the side are holding up the center portion. That's where the trading floor was. They didn't want a whole lot of support beams in the middle, so people could, in those days it was still yelling at computer screens. Everybody needed a good view. It was also very particularly designed with executives in mind. So, every executive wants a corner office. Normally you get 4 per floor. Here, they made some cutouts, so instead they have like 16 corner offices per floor. That way nobody has to feel left out and everybody gets to be a winner. Which sounds like a great setup for a joke about millennials, but it was actually for baby boomers. I'm a couple years older than the millennials myself, but I did try avocado toast a while ago, and I liked it. For $12, I better have liked it. Coming up now, we go back to 1929 for the Civic Opera Building. Layla was just in this building the other day doing some work. So the Civic Opera Building, Graham Anderson probes the white 1929, built for a guy named Samuel Insull who lived in the penthouse initially. There's a lot of urban legends about it looking like a throne. The real reason it does is these 2 towers on the side of it were supposed to be offices whose rent money would keep the opera afloat. So opera was not really cost effective in those days. Even if you sold every ticket, you usually lost money. The trouble was this place opened about 3 weeks after the stock market crash that kicked off the Great Depression. Insull ended up losing all of his money and all of the money of like 30,000 investors, had to flee to Greece, as you do. Up until recently, the next building would have been this one with these weird bits of corrugated metal also by Graham Anderson, Probst and White. They tore it down a couple of years ago, but if you look down below, they saved some of the corrugated metal to work into this new building by Getch Partners here. But it's such a contrast. In the 1920s, Halliburton, Graham Anderson, Probst, and White were building stuff like the Civic Opera building. By the 50s, they were building stuff like this. I always feel like that's eyes on top, and the rest of it is like jaws that are going to eat me alive. It's a big symbolic of capitalism. Now, coming up, you can see a little bit of a view here of 123 Whacker by Ralph Johnson, which this one came up in the 80s. It was like a 1980s reimagining of the Civic Opera building. Made a lot of news at the time because he had designed it using computers. And it really does look like an 80s computer building, too. That's just like something Scooter might have designed on his computer on Muppet Babies. This is the oldest Starbucks in town. I don't believe it was the first. They advertised themselves as the first, but there was originally one in a building on Jackson someplace. So this is the oldest one that's still around. And on the right now is, this is called the Great Lakes Building by Halliburton and Roche. A very early building for the river. It's, not using what they call the best and tallest possible use of the space here, so it's almost a miracle that this one has stayed up. It's going to be very tempting for them to tear it down and put up something taller and made out of glass. But we love this one. It adds a splash of color right at the second when we kind of need it. I'll make our way underneath here. Turn this sound up just a... No, I don't think I have sound, so you can't really hear the train. This is an incredibly noisy bridge to go under when the train is going by. Not as loud as the Washington Street Bridge, though. And you never know what you're going to find over on this little turn on the Riverwalk. There's like a brace here that used to be holding something that looked like a postmodern hammock. But behind it, this curvy one is a simple building that tends to win a lot of popularity contests, 333 Whacker, the Nuveen building. Now this one has a lot of contextualism built in. It curves right along with the curve of the river, reflects the skyline behind it. Of the two colors, at least one of them usually matches the color of the water in the river. There's some octagon cutouts that match the octagons over around here, and portholes that match it to some of the other buildings nearby. So it's every little aspect of this is built to make it fit in with the other buildings nearby it. It is probably best known in pop culture today for being the building where Ferris Bueller's dad works in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And somehow thought he was going to get home to Highland Park by 5:30. Which, I can always tell the locals are chuckling when I get to that line. I mean, even if traffic is perfect, you are not getting to Highland Park by 5:30. I've been saying for years I should write a whole other movie called Ferris Bueller's Dad's Commute that would explain all of this, using like tunnels, the Russian mafia. When in doubt, just throw in the Russian mafia. One of the most fantastic views in the world right here. And we've got the old Chicago Sun-Times building, Chicago Post building before that. Now, as we move along, we're getting by... we should talk a little bit about Daniel Burnham. Daniel Burnham was one of our great architects in Chicago. It was his idea to have this bi-level road going along here, upper and lower Whacker Drive. He used to say, make no little plans, they have no magic in them to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans, aim high, and hope end in work. So, he wrote a big plan. Besides being an architect, he was also a city planner. He wrote a big plan for Chicago in 1909 that we didn't follow to the letter or anything, but we followed quite a bit of it anyway. And for a long time after his death, he was better remembered as a city planner than he was as an architect. But now we're back to talking about him more as an architect because of all the work he did on the World's Fair of 1893, which you can see the influence of over here on the Builders Building. With this is from like 30 years after the World's Fair, but it's still using the Greek revival elements that you see in a lot of old World's Fair buildings, like the row of columns up on top, the colonnade of columns where the colonnaded ruins domino. Sorry, I just had a Charlie horse there. But If you walk around downtown, if you look up, you'll notice a lot of buildings have this colonnade of columns like this. If you're not looking, you'll never notice, but they're everywhere, including at the Marshall Fields, which is now the Macy's, which is one of very few places still standing that I can actually trace Al Capone to. Came out during his trial. He used to buy all of his underwear there. Really nice custom-tailored union suits made out of glove silk that cost him a fortune. I can't trace him to this building, the LaSalle Wacker building from 1930, but we can trace his gang here. His gang, under the leadership of Frank the Enforcer Nitti, had an office in this building after he went to prison. Police got raided in 1933. The police shot Frank the Enforcer Nitti up pretty good in that building. They didn't kill him, but it's not like he lived to a ripe old age or anything. Very few of the gangsters did. It's the thing about being a gangster. You don't have a long life expectancy, but you do get to wear really nice underpants while you're here. As we get under the bridge, first of all, this magnificent view. And over on the right is one of my favorites, 77 Wacker, the old United building, has kind of a postmodern take on those rows of columns up at the top, even a Greek-style pediment roof there. 4 of the columns extend all the way down, tying the whole building together. Endlessly classical and endlessly modern at the same time. I don't think that one is ever going to go out of style. Whereas brutalism goes in and out of style, but mostly out the last half century or so. The little cone-shaped thing is the 17th Church of Christ Scientist by Harry Weiss. We did so many buildings around here. Now back behind it, the green and gold one is the Carbide and Carbon building by Burnham and Burnham, Daniel Burnham's sons. Now the builders wanted to specifically go with the green color of like an old champagne bottle. So what you get is the effect of like an Art Deco champagne bottle, based on the look of the style of the American Radiator building in New York. But there's a diary entry where he talks about the champagne connection. Somebody sent that to me after last time I did this, and I always thought that was an urban legend. I love finding out that that's actually for real. Like, even the Make No Little Plans quote was considered apocryphal until just a couple of years ago, when somebody found it in an old speech. We'll get underneath over here. Now, having a champagne bottle building in 1930 would have been kind of charmingly subversive, because champagne wasn't really legal. Of course, we had speakeasies everywhere, but it's hard to tell what buildings really had them because they weren't really known for keeping up good paperwork. But people love to say the Jewelers building here, one of the last great Beaux-Arts buildings, had one under the dome. The story you always hear is that Capone ran a speakeasy called the Stratosphere Club in there. And Capone never set foot in this building. The Stratosphere Club was real, but it didn't open until years after Capone went to jail. And after liquor was legal again, for that matter. But that place did have the world's largest car elevator when it was built. Like I said, we've been experimenting with car elevators around here for years. Move over to the right just a little bit here. Whole block of interesting buildings coming up. The Hotel 71, as seen in Batman The Dark Knight. The taller one, Mather Tower, where there were supposed to be 2 of those, but the Depression hit and they ran out of money. Then over on the left, the London House. The glass is a new addition to the building over on the left. It's now a hotel, the old London Guarantee building by Alfred Alschuler. It's named the London House after a jazz club that was there back in the 1950s. You can go on Spotify right after the tour, look up like Sarah Vaughan live after hours at the London House, recorded live right in here. It's also an Oscar Peterson trio record recorded live right in there. And we went there on a time travel pub crawl one time. Then a bit of a better view of 333 Wacker, which was based on the design that came in second when the Chicago Tribune had a contest for who could design their new office tower. The winning one was the one coming up in front of us here by Howells and Hood. Before we get really into that, though, I want to try to talk just a second about the building that's about to merge between it and the Wrigley building with this onion dome. The old Medina Athletic Club, now the Hotel Intercontinental. It's a great urban legend that they wanted the roof to be a landing pad for Zeppelins. Which, by the time it was built, I think that would have been a ridiculous idea. It never would have worked. The building's owners insist that it's true. But I got to imagine every time they were building a new building at the time, there was probably somebody on the board saying, now, should we have a Zeppelin landing pad? If we don't have one, we're going to be obsolete in 5 years. Well, Chicago Tribune Tower was still run by the Chicago Tribune until just a couple of years ago, and after they moved out, it's now being turned into condos. But a friend of mine who worked there said, hey, my key card still works. You want to bust in and drink scotch and smoke cigars and break things? Yes, I did. Right in front of us, more Art Deco than Art Deco, though it's technically from the 80s, so we have to call it postmodern. The NBC Tower by Adrian Smith. Streamlined verticality, simple geometric art, kind of an update on the building at 30 Rock. NBC Tower. I love this one. I always feel like Superman ought to be flying around it. And technically, we were supposed to stop calling things Art Deco if they weren't built in the Art Deco era. I think that's a pretty silly rule, personally. Brief view of the Aon building. The pointy spire one here is 2 Prudential Plaza. This one, including the spire, is like 998 feet tall. If that were my building, that would drive me nuts. I'd be like up there taping yardsticks onto the top trying to get over 1,000. Similarly, 311 South Wacker misses 1,000 by just a couple of feet. Now, if you look behind these rather bland modernist/international school buildings, you'll see this one with the wavy balconies. That is called Aqua Tower, designed by Jeannie Gang and Company. When it was built, it was the tallest building in the world designed by a woman. Or primarily by a woman, anyway. But it didn't hold that title for long. Pretty soon, some other buildings overseas took over that title. But now Jeannie Gang has taken it back with this other one that's going to be emerging over on the right here. One of the greatest new buildings in town. This is the Wanda Vista Tower, climbing up and up and up into the sky. It was still under construction when I got this video last year. But up on the top there, you can see there's this portion where it seems like it's missing a piece. That is called a blow-through floor. Now, this one, they determined that a liquid-tuned mass damper wasn't enough all by itself to keep it from swaying, so they have this space called the blow-through, which they've done before in New York a few times. It's the first time they've tried that here in Chicago, but the idea is it's just an empty floor for the wind to blow through. You got to be really careful with blow-through floors. If you're not careful, it'll turn the entire building into like the world's largest whistle. I told that to somebody who lives in the building next door one time, and they were like, what? But they know what they're doing. I don't know how they keep it from turning into a whistle, but they do. Over on the left is Centennial Fountain, which was not operating at the time that I went out to film this one. But it was built to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the group that undertook maybe our biggest task in Chicago, reversing the entire flow of the river. This river used to flow out to the lake about like you'd expect it to, but then as now, the lake was our drinking water, and into the river we were pouring all of our sewage, all of our garbage. All of that would flow out to the river, and we would drink it right back up, which is a fantastic way to spread cholera, dysentery, all of those Oregon Trail diseases. So in one of the most human moments of all time, instead of saying, hey, let's stop polluting the river, we decided, hey, why don't we just push the entire river backwards? So that was what they did. They dug a canal that was deeper than the lakes. That started the lake pushing backward, flowing into the canal. Gravity did this thing. The whole river got pushed backward. So now all of our sewage would be sent to St. Louis instead. Yay! And they loved us for that in St. Louis. Now, coming up over on the left here is going to be an empty space that just kind of breaks my heart. Right over in this space to the left, they were planning to build the Chicago Spire. That was going to be 2,000 feet tall, the very distinctive corkscrew shape that would have become an instantly recognizable symbol of the city, not to mention the tallest building in the United States, and would still have that title. They got as far as digging out the core support for it, but then 2008 happened, the funding collapsed, now we've just got this empty space here. Our mayor at the time said that this was going to be like the Statue of Liberty of Chicago, a welcoming beacon to all of the pilgrims who sail across Lake Michigan looking for a better life. But 2008 happened. Every few months we see a new idea, I feel like, of what they're going to plan to build here now, but nothing ever really comes of it. At least not yet. But you never know. We're always working on new things here in Chicago. We're always coming up with new ideas, always coming up with astonishing new possibilities. So, all right, everybody, that'll get us right back where we began. So it is time for me to plug some upcoming events. Next in-person tour is going to be Saturday morning, a week from today at Rose Hill Cemetery. In-person tickets are available at MysteriousChicago.com. More of the architects that we talked about today are over at Graceland. There are a couple of them at Rose Hill. The next virtual tour is going to be Tuesday night. I'll probably broadcast it here, but mainly on the Effing Chicago page. That is going to be the virtual ghost tour. but the effing Chicago edition, which means it'll have a lot more swearing than your average virtual tour. Then next Thursday, we're going to be doing the Art Deco Chicago virtual tour. That's one I've only done once before a few months back, so I'm excited to bring that one back. And of course, we do morning mini tours every morning around here on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page at 10 o'clock. Tomorrow is going to be Mural Monday. We've got lots and lots of cool stuff coming up. And in fact, we're even going to be doing a convention pretty soon. But first, I'll plug the place to get your t-shirts. Mysterious Chicago t-shirts, sweatshirts, flasks, mugs, etc. can all be had at cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago, including the new design for Mystericon 2021. Taking place at the Palmer House Hotel and at a series of events, including an in-person boat tour, cemetery walking tours. Mandy and Layla are going to be doing some tours. Just be a member of the Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club page for more information about this one. But the t-shirt design is now available. So with that, everybody, we are going to put Earl Father Hines back on. I'm going to go close this window over here where the light's getting right in. And we will just hang out like we always do. Thanks a lot for joining me, everybody.
Have a little Father Hines melody of the cop.
This my very sweet boy, good night. Let me move half-past since I've gone. I'll be back.
All right, that looks better.
Every blade of grass where I roam.
Amy, good luck and stay safe.
As I pass every home, hand in hand, we'll stand beneath the
Well, James, I was thinking of playing a set myself at the convention. Send me a message. Thank you, George. Thank you, Jordana. Hey, Diane. See you, Betsy.
With a bow from Leroy Harris for the words, we turn on now to the next tune. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive.
Thanks,
on the
Kelly.
heading of So Help Me.
My favorite building in Chicago, it varies a lot. I love the way the Board of Trade looks when they light it up at night. And yeah, Suzanne, hopefully this month, Miles will be getting a Playmate. Late this month, though, not right away. Thanks, Tato. Have a good day, Audrey. Thanks, Sherry Ann. Hey, Megan. Thanks, Ann. Thank you, Sue. Dean, the New World Trade Center is the highest in the United States, if you count the spire. When did they put the map of the Chicago River on that building? It wasn't that long ago. I can't remember the exact year right now. Hey, Kay. Hey, Kristen. Carol, the naked Trike Angel statue is in the town of Johnston, a suburb of Des Moines. Outside of the city hall. Thanks, Ava. Thanks, Jacqueline. Valerie, it'll be up on the videos section of the Mysterious Chicago Facebook page just shortly after this. Vicky, we're waiting until Aiden is through with moving in before we go go find a kitten. So that'll be a few more weeks. But thanks for the tip. Kristen, I remember that well. I so wanted to go that year, though. Back in 96, after Load came out. I remember it was going to be at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. I had seen Metallica at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in 94. Kathleen, there's a number of options to travel to from the Palmer House to the Cemetery tours. There's trains, there's cabs and Lyft, there's buses.
Well, we're about halfway through the Jive Concert.
What are the streets that parallel the river? It depends. There's Riverside runs alongside it for a bit. Wacker runs alongside it for a bit. Elston runs alongside it for a bit. But it's a long and twisting river.
Earl Father Hine. Yeah, but now comes Leroy Harris to sing Now It Can Be Told.
Hey, Linda, glad to have you late anyway. Thanks. Your tips help keep these help to keep these events free and frequent. I may have to scale back the regulars at least in fall, at least a little bit. There's just going to be so much going on.
The world may know the sentimental story, the greatest romance they ever knew.
Thanks, Lydia. This was good practice for me. Now, the tour, the boat tour in person starts about 2/3 of the way through this one. It's a lot of the same stuff, but it's a little bit different.
Every other tale of
So it changes the whole tenor of the tour.
an imitation, the great love story has never been told before, but now it can be told.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Karen. Let me bring Miles over. Miles, what do you see out there? Watching the birds. Nice people. Some of them weren't here yet when you came on before.
December 9th, add to it a little of the effervescent swing of Father Hines, and you have
Thanks, Sue.
Beside a Moonlit Stream.
Yeah, just 2 months until Mystericon. To Cleveland, I don't really have any restaurant recommendations in Cleveland. I never really. We're always in kind of the outskirts of Cleveland when I'm there.
The tropic breeze is blowing,
Oh, well, Schneider's.
love light glowing.
Or, what's that place called?
Moonlit stream.
It's a deli place that has a name kind of like that.
The waterfall
Schleiman's? Schleiman's might be it.
are clinging
Somebody else might know.
by the moonlit stream.
Let's see really quick here.
Tom-tom beating so fast. If this is only a dream, then why can it last forever, darling?
Schleiman's.
The river
Schleiman's Deli. That's where you want to go in Cleveland.
that you are mine completely beside a moonlit stream.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. Miles. Now Miles is climbing all over the shelves here, on which I am set up. Yeah, James, throw me a line. I'll tell you about the convention. There have been a couple people asked if I was going to play some music at the convention. I might as well. Hey, Melissa.
Now
He's up.
comes up number 8 on our program of dancing, a tune titled, melodically, A Little Kiss at Twilight.
Purring and purring up here. Yeah, did you think about how you're gonna get down? Did ya? Here we go. Watch that microphone, Miles. Why don't you just sit down, okay? You're gonna knock that Springsteen album off the wall. We'll definitely live stream some stuff from the convention. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I love this shirt too. It's just one of those. If you search for retro menswear on Google, you get some targeted ads on Facebook with shirts like this. It took forever for it to arrive. It was one of those places. Kelly, it is at look up Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club. Hey, Steven. Yeah, I would like to do that. Next time I'm in Springfield. I mean, I've been there several times. Octavio, you'd have to get really lucky to find anything this good mid-century or ragstock. But now and then you do get lucky. Right now, last time I was at Ragstock, they had some like new examples of like 1989 button-down stuff. Very 80s patterns. Thanks, Londa.
Imagine you'll hear that famous 7 brass of Earl Hines in Bambino.
I should really plug the Patreon. Some cool stuff coming up on the Patreon, too. Patreon, if you're on the, a few of the tiers get like 4 posts a week. So even I can never keep track of who owns the Palmer House. Thanks, Ava. Yeah, that is rude to discuss getting Italianized. I'm trying to recreate the grapefruit rosemary lemonade they had at Wormhole 2 the other day. So right now I got like a pitcher full of lemonade with a little bit of grapefruit juice and some rosemary in there. It's not totally successful, but it's okay. Oh yes, Dina, on the Patreon, once a week is a high-quality photograph of a cemetery and a coyote, of which I've got quite a few. Monday mornings are a Chicago history story. Then Thursday, if you're on the deep research tier, there'll be several old articles from my archives, usually to do with whatever that week's Chicago history post was. Then Friday is H.H. Holmes Day. And there are some slots left, I think, on the $20 tier, which gets you a free walking tour ticket every month.
But here's rhythm and jive, Earl Father Hines and the St. Louis Blues.
Alright, Rebecca, go do something productive. I already did something productive. Thanks, Irene. Patty Ronnie is still in bed. Some new video game she was waiting for dropped last night, so she was up, I think, pretty late. Have a good day, Kristen. Alright, everybody, I'm going to plug the upcoming events. We got some new people moving into the building, so I got to take advantage of the dryer being all mine for another couple of hours. So, quick plug. Saturday, tickets are still out there for Rose Hill Cemetery. Then the next virtual tour is going to be Tuesday night, a very unusual Tuesday night tour, but it'll be the effing Chicago edition of the Ghost Tour. Like a Ghost Tour, but with more swearing. And next Thursday night, the next regular Mysterious Chicago virtual tour will be Art Deco Chicago. Some Art Deco gems all around the city. Plus, don't forget, we got morning mini tours here every day at 10 o'clock on the Mysterious Chicago Facebook. Tomorrow will be Mural Monday. I might be working from home Tuesday or Wednesday to show a thing that I put together the other day when I didn't think I'd be able to do the tour. But lots of good stuff coming up, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours, saying stay safe, stay upright, stay daring. But most importantly, stay spooky, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours.